This is Anatomy of a Failed Sexual Assault Investigation, Step 4. If we want to fail at sexual assault investigations, Step 4 is to cherry pick the electronic evidence. When victim skepticism and confirmation bias influence the process, law enforcement agencies sometimes use electronic evidence to make arguments that the evidence does not actually support. And it's important not to cherry pick the electronic evidence or use it in this kind of way. Rather, we need to consider all of the evidence and what conclusions all of the evidence taken together leads to. So let's look at an example of failing to consider all of the evidence, and this first example comes from the Virginia case of Laura McLeod. In this case, there was video footage of the sexual encounter where the victim said that she was being raped by her sister's fiancé. The perpetrator had filmed the encounter without the victim's consent, and that's why police had video footage of the encounter. Police watched the footage, they concluded that the sex was consensual, and they charged the victim with false reporting. But they ignored the larger context around this footage. The rapist, according to Laura, had isolated her in an unfamiliar neighborhood late at night and had locked her phone in the trunk of his car, making it impossible for her to call anybody and ask for help. He had threatened her, telling her that if she didn't agree to have sex with him, he was going to take her to a party where she was going to be gang raped by a number of men. And in order to bolster the power of the threat, he brandished a gun that he had. And then he insisted on videotaping the encounter, telling her to make it look like you're enjoying it or else. So Laura told the police that she never consented to the sex or to the videotaping of it, and that she cooperated with the rapist because she was afraid of what he might do to her if she didn't. So this is an example of a case where the police looked at the video footage in isolation without considering all of the factors around how it was made. Second example that we'll take a look at, we'll go back to the case of Emma Mannion for an example of video footage being used in a way that I can only describe as bad faith. Emma had told police that during a night out in the fall semester of her freshman year at the University of Alabama, she had gotten separated from her girlfriends by two initially very nice young men who then led her to a red Jeep and they sexually assaulted her there. Police told Emma that they had collected video footage from that area and that there was footage showing her hugging and kissing the man that she later accused of rape. But curiously, they never offered to show the video footage to Emma. So then, long after her case had been closed, without the police ever identifying or questioning the perpetrators, many, many months after, she was able to finally see the footage that they were talking about. And it turns out that the footage was of a completely different woman wearing completely different clothing. It wasn't even Emma. The video that they claimed disproved her account actually had nothing to do with her. She was not in the footage. She was wearing shorts that night. The woman in the footage was wearing a long flowing dress. I can only call this a bad faith use of electronic evidence by officers who wanted to close cases that they were probably not competent to investigate. So let's redirect here. If we want to succeed at sexual assault investigation, what should we do? Well, what we should do is that we should consider all of the electronic evidence available in the case and its limitations. We should avoid cherry-picking electronic evidence, and instead we should consider what the evidence can and cannot support, and we should consider electronic evidence in the context of the entire case. What does all the evidence taken together say? So now let's go back to Gail Sherwood, and we need to do two things here. First, we need to consider the limitations of the driver footage, which I showed you in part 3. And second, we need to consider the driver footage alongside other evidence from the camera that night. So as you will recall, the driver footage from Gail's home showed one person getting in Gail's car and driving the car out of the camera range. In other words, approximately 15 feet forward. The prosecution's argument was that that person is Gail, that she's alone, and that therefore she must be driving herself away from the property to fake a rape. And therefore they concluded the rape never happened. Does the driver footage really support that interpretation? Well, there are 3 limitations to this footage that we need to consider. The first one is that it is not clear who the person is because the quality of the footage is terrible. And what you are looking at on the screen right now is a photograph that the police created from the very best shot of the face of the person that they could get off of the videotape. So they made this photograph and they blew it up, and you are looking at the exact same quality of photograph that the jurors in the case saw. You can see for yourself that this is terrible quality footage, but a defense expert also weighed in, stating that the video falls grossly short of the standard necessary to demonstrate an identification. When I originally gave this talk at the AVAWI conference in Chicago in April of 2023, the 2,000 people in the audience also weighed in. The room frankly burst out laughing when I showed them the driver footage and when I showed them this specific photograph and told them that that footage was the main evidence that the prosecution relied on in accusing Gail of lying about rape. So the footage is of very poor quality, as we can all see. The second consideration is that a thorough investigation of this footage would go beyond just looking at the appearance of the driver. Police should have considered the driver's behavior as well. And they could have established what Gail's baseline driving behaviors were and then compared those behaviors to what is seen in the video. And if they had done that, they would have realized that the person caught on camera engages in 3 driving behaviors that are inconsistent with Gail's driving habits. The first is that the person does not wear a seatbelt, and Gail always wears a seatbelt due to her wanting to avoid the seatbelt alarm going off that annoys her in the car. So you can see the person getting in here, not putting their seatbelt on. Then you'll also see, for the second issue, that the person never turns the headlights on before driving the car forward. Gail always puts on the headlights because of wildlife and because of cats in the area, and also because she has a visual disability, which makes using the headlights even more important to her. I'm just going to play this video one more time while I talk about the third factor. And then the third thing that you see is that the person applies the brakes as they are going down the driveway because the driveway is very steep. So this would be the normal response to the driveway by anyone unfamiliar with it. But Gail actually never brakes while descending the driveway because at the time of these events, she had been navigating this driveway for over 20 years and she was accustomed to doing it without the brakes. So even though police were in a position to establish Gail's typical driving behaviors and then compare them to the behavior of the driver caught on camera, they never did so. Confirmation bias led them to their conclusion and they stopped there. Now, a further limitation of the driver footage is that it gives us no information about what the driver did once the vehicle left the camera range. Did the car leave the property, or did it stop on the driveway after leaving the camera range? We simply don't know. And this question is of critical importance because we know that Gail was not aware of the hidden camera until after she was arrested, which means that on the night of June 1st, she had no idea that a camera was watching her house, and she therefore would have had no incentive to conceal anything that she was doing. If she wanted to go fake a rape, she could have just turned on the lights, walked out the front door, and driven the car away in her usual manner. But the camera never shows anyone leaving by the front door. Now, in contrast to Gail's lack of awareness of the camera, there was evidence in the materials that she provided to the police that her assailant, if he existed, was a police insider who had knowledge of police activities, including the hidden camera, and who therefore may have taken measures to avoid being seen. One of the main reasons the police knew this about her assailant was that Gail always maintained that she thought that her assailant was a police officer because she could hear a police radio in the background while she was being raped. A piece of evidence corroborating her assailant's knowledge of what the police were doing relative to investigating her claims was this card that she received in the mail, which contains the message, "You are on CCTV." This card was one of dozens of cards that Gail received from her assailant. It arrived at her house at some point after the hidden camera had been installed, but Gail had no idea what the writer was referring to when she received this card because she did not know about any hidden camera. Those facts become more important here because her assailant may have known about the camera and may have taken measures to avoid being seen on camera. There's evidence that he was aware of other activities happening at the police station, such as later on, Gail found out that her bail date had been changed because of a communication she received from her assailant before she found out that information officially from the police. So there was evidence here that this individual, her assailant, knew what was going on at the police station. So, if he was somebody who did have knowledge of the camera, then perhaps he was taking measures to avoid being seen on camera, such as by getting an accomplice to drive the car out of the camera range, and such as by avoiding the use of Gail's front door. So, to wrap up on the driver's footage, it is limited in its usefulness because of the poor quality, because the police failed to analyze the driver's behaviors relative to Gail's driving behaviors, and because it does not tell us whether the car stopped further down the driveway or whether it left the property. We also must consider the driver footage in the context of evidence indicating that Gail's assailant may have had knowledge of the camera and may have been on her property and orchestrating his activities in such a way as to avoid the camera. In addition to all of that, what else did the camera see that night? Police made no effort to consider whether the camera footage corroborated information gleaned from Gail's interview with them. The camera footage actually provided corroboration in numerous ways, all of which were ignored by the police, but perhaps most importantly, the camera showed a man walking on Gail's property within 15 feet of her house about an hour before her car left the property. Gail had told police that her dogs alerted her to a disturbance outside of her home around 12:30 a.m. They started barking, and a motion sensor alarm covering her front patio started beeping. So if you were an officer in receipt of that information, you would most likely want to check out what the camera picked up at that time and see if anything was going on. I mean, wouldn't you want to do that? So here's what the camera showed around 12:35 a.m. I'll start the video here now. The area had remained completely black for about an hour before the footage that I'm showing you now, when some lights that you're seeing right now suggest a car has come down the lane, and the car pauses long enough to drop a person off. So we never see the car, of course, but you can tell by the movement of lights that most likely that light you're seeing is created by a vehicle. And then next, you're going to see some unusual lights that suggest that a person is in the area shining a flashlight on the house. And so there you see some of those lights coming along. Okay, now I'm going to stop the video and I'm going to describe what comes next before I show it to you. A man meeting the description of Gail's assailant is going to appear when the counter at the top of the screen on the left reads 003538. So in other words, once I start the video, he's going to come on in about 6 seconds. He has his back to the camera, and you will only see his upper back and shoulders and the back of his head. He's only visible for 3 seconds. He's going to enter the camera frame at the bottom of the screen between the right-hand side and the center, and he walks past the front of the car before exiting at the left-hand side close to the bottom of the screen. So if you blink, you might miss him. Keep your eye on the bottom of the screen, and I'm going to resume the video now. About 3 more seconds. Here he comes. You see him walking along there, and of course you can replay this now if you like. The stationary light that comes on after he passes that you're seeing now indicates that he has triggered a nearby motion sensor light with his movement. So the camera picked up some incredible evidence here corroborating Gail's claim of a disturbance around 12:30 a.m. as well as her subsequent abduction and rape shortly thereafter. Seeing this footage for the first time made me wonder how the police responded to it, given that they charged Gail with false reporting. One would expect that they had ruled this man out as her assailant, given that they arrested her for a crime. So how would they do that? How would you rule him out? Well, let's pan out to this view of Gail's house and her neighbor's house, so that we can understand the significance of where the man was located. So in this picture, you see 2 driveways. The driveway on the right-hand side is Gail, and the driveway on the left-hand side is Gail's next-door neighbor. And you'll recall that the camera only picks up the upper 15 feet of Gail's long driveway, so the man caught on camera was right next to her car, and he was either heading towards the back of her house or to her neighbor's house from the position where he was seen. He's over 60 feet away from the road, so he is not in this location by accident. He is not walking along the road. He is on Gail's property very close to her house. Also, because of the very hilly terrain around Gail's house, this man can only be going one of 2 places from the position where he is seen right up next to her car. He is either walking towards the garage and backyard of Gail's property, where there are places to hide, or he is going to the next door neighbor's house. There's nowhere else to go without reversing direction and walking 65 feet back down towards the road. It is simply too steep, and there is too much shrubbery in the way for a person to walk across the front yards of these homes in order to get to the door of a farther away neighbor's home. And that is something where the jury would really have to visit the site in order to understand that. And the jury in this case was never taken to the site. So the way to rule this man out as Gale's assailant would have been to speak to the couple who live next door and see if the man is connected to that home in any way. Does he live next door? Was he a late-night visitor? If this man had any connection to the neighbor's house, police could easily have identified him, and they could have learned his name by speaking with the neighbors, and then they could have questioned him. But that never happened. Police never questioned the neighbors about this man because investigating him was never part of their investigation. The police failed to ever identify the man or rule him out as a suspect in the crimes committed against Gale. In fact, there is nothing in the record to indicate that the police even watched this portion of the footage and realized that there was a man on the property corroborating Gale's account. And I say that because one police employee signed off on a document indicating that he had watched the entirety of the camera footage and had found nothing else significant. But remember, he's only on there for 3 seconds, so blink and you might miss him. Now, the police did speak to the next-door neighbor, not in relation to this man, but in relation or as part of a house-to-house inquiries process after the events of June 1st. And that conversation revealed that the next-door neighbors confirmed that they were already in bed by 12:30 a.m. So since they were already in bed, and since they also indicated to police that they were unaware of any disturbance after 12:30, it is safe to conclude that they did not have any late-night visitors. So the police treatment of the rest of this camera footage is a problem that ties the limitations of electronic evidence to confirmation bias and to the failure to investigate. If the police were aware of the man caught on camera, then confirmation bias very likely played a role in the failure to investigate him further. And if they were not aware, it is because they stopped investigating once they had the driver's footage. Either way, the police appeared to have decided what theory they wanted to prove with the driver footage, and then they ignored all the evidence that didn't fit with that theory. Now, I'm posting a separate series of videos on my YouTube channel for anyone interested in looking in more detail at what the camera saw at Gale's house that night. So let's just shift now to what's our takeaway on electronic evidence. Well, we need to be very conscientious and we need to be very careful. Because electronic evidence is easy to manipulate precisely because it is easy to assume that it doesn't lie. But we must consider all of the evidence and how it fits together. If we pick and choose, ignoring some evidence while embracing and even twisting other pieces, such as the way that the video in Emma's case was a bit twisted, then we are not going to get to the truth of the matter. We may be able to construct a narrative that we could use to talk a jury into convicting a victim of false reporting, but if we do that, we lose sight of the larger principles that should be driving us. We investigate sexual assault in order to apprehend perpetrators and protect the community. If we get rid of cases by distorting some evidence while ignoring other evidence, we are harming the community and enabling perpetrators, and that's the opposite of what we should be doing. Now, we have one more step in the anatomy of a failed rape investigation, and join me in the next part of this series to explore that.